And I'll just start to introduce a little bit for anybody who's new, or and for you as well, Linda, just to share a little bit about what this is kind of all about, because you know, and I'll keep admitting people as they are requesting it, but I'll just share a little bit about the reason that I kind of created this summit as well.
Wonderful.
So as usual, we just keep ourselves on mute so that everybody can hear the lovely Linda. And yeah, if you've got any questions throughout the session, you feel free to pop them in the group chat, which looks like some people are already saying hello. So yeah, so and then at some point we'll stop and we'll go to questions as well. So that's always going to be an option. Sorry, I'm just trying to let people in and figure all this out. So yeah, if you've got any questions, then do drop them in the chat box, or just raise your hand later on when we open it up. As usual, this is kind of, for me, this summit's all about self-rediscovery, because it's felt like that's how my journey with the principles has been. Because I think for a lot of people, when they come to self-rediscovery and trying to find out who they are, it's often about kind of exploring and fixing and changing who we are in human form. And it was kind of a realization of mine that that's kind of the opposite of how it is in exploring who we are. So for me, it's more about seeing deeper about who we already are. And that's why I call it rediscovery, because it's kind of like a peeling back and seeing who we always were, beyond our thinking, more from our wisdom, and how we can kind of, or how we are moved from there. So that's why I called it the Self-Rediscovery Summit, and it's been really lovely because we've had loads of different speakers on sharing their journeys and their different, you know, their wisdom on different topics, which is, of course, is all kind of the same wisdom, really. We're all pointing to the same thing in different forms. But yeah, so we're here every Friday. If anybody has any questions that aren't kind of answered in here and in between, then you're welcome to email me. Or I'm also in the Self-Rediscovery Facebook community as well. So there's always option to kind of, yeah, just receive a pointing in a direction towards wisdom, which feels really nice. And yeah, we're honoured to have you here, Linda, today, and to be talking about such a kind of poignant topic as well, because it was really, again, kind of wisdom that's created this conversation, it feels to me, because I kind of thought before I reached out to you, I'd really like somebody to talk about grief, and then you said, yeah, I'd like to talk about the hidden gifts in grief and brilliance in the dark. And I was like, oh, well, there you go, perfect. that's amazing. So yeah, it feels like an important one with everything that's going on in the world as well at the moment. So I'm really grateful that you're here to share something different on that, I guess. So yeah, I'll just formally introduce you a little bit, because it's always nice to, and then we can go into more human conversation about all of it. So yeah, I think when I was looking up your own story, it was very much about kind of how you had the experience of suddenly losing your beloved husband at age 47 that intensified your search for answers, it says on the website, and as you saw that moments of being dazzled by beauty, love and happiness were not entirely lost even in intense grief, and you wondered how could moments of sharp pain and beautiful feelings coexist inside you. And then obviously you came to understand how the psychological experience of life works for all of us, and had insights about the nature of the three principles, and the logic behind your experience became more apparent, and you saw the principles as a practical tool for navigating life with more ease and grace. And since then you've been working with the three principles, focusing on overcoming trauma, finding wisdom for moving gracefully through transformative change. And you work with women, couples, mental health professionals and coaches, utilising 35 years plus of clinical experience and 12 years plus of sharing the three principles to inform the spiritual nature of your work. So that's the kind of formal bit. I think you're muted, actually. Let me just see if I can unmute you.
I muted myself.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, so
I wanted to be sure I heard my introduction.
Yeah, oh, bless you. So yeah, I normally just then at this point just open it out to kind of for you to share your personal journey, because I know people love personal story, and so I wondered if you could tell us a bit about your own journey and experience and what it was that you saw differently, and we just go from there. Just see where
Sure. Nicole, remind me, how long do we have?
So it's up to you how long you've got. We normally do between an hour and a half, depending on how much time you've got and how many questions there are. So.
And do you prefer to just have people asking questions throughout, or wait till?
Yeah, it's up to you. We normally do a little bit of a sharing, and then people, if people have got questions, we can just open that up when it feels right for you.
Perfect. Good. Perfect. Okay. And will you be monitoring the chat?
I will.
Do people use that? Okay, good. So I don't have to worry about that.
No.
Okay, good.
I'll sort
it's kind of humorous in a way that a couple of days ago, somebody I was talking to said, "Oh, I see that you're doing this sharing with Nicole, who's lovely, this week on grief." And I said, "Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It will be fun."
Yeah.
And there was kind of a dead silence. And the person said to me, "Did you just use grief and fun in the same sentence?" And I started laughing. And I stepped back and I said, "Yeah, I did." And I said, "But I really don't mean that to be irreverent. I really don't." And so let me put that out there if anyone on this call is currently moving through a grief process. But I really, at this point, I just have this sense of grief that is lighthearted, but not lighthearted in a jokey sort of way. My husband is very lighthearted, and he makes a lot of jokes, and he laughs a lot. Many of you probably have heard Bill Pettit do workshops. He's always punning about something. It's not that kind of lightheartedness. It's just a light inner feeling, a light peacefulness about it, and an amazing awe and reverence for what I learned from the experience of going through a very deep grief. This morning I was reading, as I do every morning, from this book called Embers by Richard Wagamese. And Richard is no longer with us as in human form. He was an Ojibwe Indian, Native American, and his work is really sourced in and founded in Native understanding. And I read this, and I thought I would start by sharing it. "What's needed are eyes that focus with the soul. What's needed are spirits open to everything. What's needed are the belief that wonder is the glue of the universe, and the desire to seek more of it. Be filled with wonder."
Oh.
And that's really what I want to talk about today is that what I have come to through the years is a kind of wonder about grief. And even as we're going through this incredible time right now of the virus, and the incredible time here in the United States of just having our racism, our sexism, and our homophobia, and so many other things just like exploded in front of us, so that we're taking a deeper look, that I think that people sometimes don't even have words for what they're describing. And as I look at it, one of the things I'm seeing is that a lot of people are experiencing grief. And
this is something that I kind of, when I was thinking about today's session, it was kind of like almost super relevant, because it feels like the world is kind of grieving on a global scale almost in some ways. So it's really kind of poignant for me, I think, this conversation today.
Yeah, that's really true. And I think the climate situation, for example, is one thing that is also really touched people who are saying, if we are looking at the collapse of world civilization, what do we do in the face of that? And so to some degree, a lot of the people that I'm working with at different levels are experiencing it. And so my experience was really, my understanding of grief obviously was really deeply affected by the loss of my husband at the age of 47. We had been in a relationship for 25 years, married for 18, and then he died very suddenly in an automobile accident on Christmas Eve in 1991 or 1999. So that was 20 years ago. So I'm 20 years past that. But I started to have a lot of spontaneous experiences through that I was conscious of, but I didn't really have words for them. I didn't really understand what was happening. And so fast forwarding 4 years, when I met Bill Pettit, my beautiful husband now, one of the things I see happened is that the principles began to give me a language and a logic for what I had come through and what I had experienced, and continued to help me unfold in that journey from that point.
Yeah.
I read a couple of days ago in the book Women Who Run with the Wolves, which I'm reading again for the umpteenth time.
I'm reading that at the moment.
Pardon?
I've got that next to my bed to read at the moment. So.
Oh wow, it's a lovely, lovely book. It's so beautifully and poetically written. But one of the things that Clarissa Pinkola Estes talks about is that people who enjoy the most rich, vibrant experience of moving through life are those who come to terms with the fact that life is a dance with death.
Oh, I love that.
That in some ways sounds a little macabre, but it's not. You know, it kind of speaks to a poignant awareness that that's just what life is. It's a dance with death, and that life is cyclical, and we live, we die, and there's rebirth. We see it in nature. We experience it even in the power of thought. We have a thought, we have an experience coming from that thought, and it leaves, and we have another opportunity to have a thought and be reborn again in that new thought. And I really like to think that that's the way I live my life, is welcoming everything and welcoming every aspect of death, and being willing to look at it, because it doesn't frighten me anymore. There's no fear associated with it. Yeah. And that was one of the gifts of moving through grief deeply. I'll share a few just experiences that I had in that time that really began to inform my understanding of grief. And one of them, I know I've spoken about publicly before, so some of you may have heard it. But my husband died at about 11 o'clock. And I got a phone call where I was, because I was not with him. And it was my sister-in-law. And she said to me, Linda, you know, Jim has had an automobile accident and he didn't make it. And it was Christmas. I'm Polish, and my mother and I were working on a huge Polish meal for Christmas. And my 14-year-old daughter was with me, and I had to tell her that her father had died, and tell my family, my mother, my father, my brothers and sisters who were in the house. And it was chaos for a while. There was the chaos of the family, you know, crying, and my daughter screaming, and phone calls from the police and the funeral director and the hospital and the state police. And after that was all done and people kind of settled in quiet for a bit, I was sitting in the bedroom, and I looked out of the window, and a snow had fallen in Michigan that was very crystalline. It was very beautiful, and the sun was glinting off the snow, and it looked like diamonds being refracted in all different directions. And I had the thought, oh my goodness. For a minute, I was just captivated by it. It was just, oh my, just beautiful. And then had the thought, oh, that is just so beautiful. And then the very next thought that came was, how is it possible that I can be experiencing beauty when I've just lost my husband of 18 years? And I had a little stab of grief about that, and about guilt. It's like, whoa, is there something wrong with me? Am I so shallow? that I'm seeing this beauty. And then the next thought, which did not come from my intellect, was what you've just seen is a gift. You will spend the rest of your life unwrapping it.
Oh.
And I remember thinking, what does that mean? I had no clue at that moment, none whatsoever. But what I would see over the next days and months and weeks was that beauty still was, and my ability to appreciate it still was. It was perfectly intact. And it would come in waves. It would come with a person walking up to me saying, oh, I remember this thing about Jim, or it would come sitting with his sister and looking through pictures and being overcome with what a beautiful person he was. Or it would come when I went to get my mail from the mailbox one day, and in spite of the fact that it was below zero and it snowed, I saw a little violet peeking up through the snow. And so that was one of the hidden gifts in grief, was that beauty still was, and that every time I focused on it, every time I found it, every time I saw it, every time I noticed it, every time I was conscious of it, the feeling inwardly would lighten, and I could feel the healing come through. And that was a real gift. The second gift that I wanted to talk about a little bit was my first real deep appreciation of the silence behind life. And so I think, having worked with a lot of people who are grieving any number of things, one of the things that often happens as people walk the journey is that there is a period after a loss where people kind of go into overdrive a little bit. And I saw that even as the virus took hold, that there was just this sense of people being in overdrive on social media.
Yeah.
And that's natural, because the human mind is really trying to make sense of what we're experiencing. And I had dozens and dozens of questions in my mind, like, oh my goodness, if we had just done this or that, if Jim had taken a different route, if we changed the tires on the car, and, you know, all kinds of things that I would think about obsessively, trying to make sense of what was happening. But there was this place, and I don't know exactly where it was, but there was this place where at some level I saw, although I didn't know what I was seeing at that point, that there were no answers to my questions. The human mind had no answers.
Yeah.
The human brain had no answers. I had never gone through an experience like this before.
Wow. And you hadn't come across the principles at this point. So
no,
that's kind of what I love about this story, is that that you had kind of, you didn't need to get the principles to see this. It was just there.
Yeah, it's beautiful that you say that, because I think that's one of the learnings that took me a while to come to as I learned about the principles. Was like, oh my goodness, they were operating perfectly. They have been operating perfectly from the time I was born.
Yeah.
And the dance of them can be seen in every single experience of my life.
Yeah.
There's a beautiful thing at the home of Carl Jung, above his yard, at the entrance to his yard, that says, invoked or not, God is present.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. Because
And I think about the principles that way. Invoked or not, they're present.
Yeah, I love that, because there's so many people that I come across, and clients that I work with and things like that, who feel that there's something to get, and it feels like there's something to do. But the fact that you didn't even know about them, there wasn't that language there, and you were still having that experience, just kind of really shows that it's not something that we need to understand particularly, but it's kind of useful then to understand it and to begin to get a sense for it and have that language, because it makes sense of what's of life, really, I guess.
Yeah, I fell into this quiet, and it's a quiet that I don't know, except for recently. I don't know I've had it quite as deeply. after that experience. And it was just, I continued to work. I was a therapist, continued to see clients, including clients who were grieving. I had actually started a grief group right before my husband died, about 3 weeks before. And I was going to drop out of it thinking that the experience was too fresh. I was leading it. And the members called me up and they said, no, you need to stay on with this because now you understand what we're going through. And so I did. But there was just this beautiful sort of deep quiet behind life. And I began to see more than I'd ever seen before that point. I glimpsed at some, but now it was absolutely apparent to me that we are guided through everything. And we're guided in thought, we're guided in images. I'll give you an example. So about 2 weeks after Jim died, I was really having an extremely anxious moment. My daughter was out of the house. I lived in a very isolated place in West Virginia in the mountains, no visible neighbors anywhere. So I was alone. And I was really anxious, and I was walking through the house wringing my hands and crying, and I couldn't get settled. I was so anxious. I was just agitated. And I didn't know what to do. And I kept crying out loud, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And all of a sudden, in between one of the what do I do's, there came this quiet, still voice that said, Linda, sit down and write your thank you notes. And I thought, oh, okay. I went over and I got my thank you notes, and I got the list of people who had been at my husband's funeral service. I started writing them. And I saw that as I started writing and started to experience gratitude for all the people who'd come and contributed lovely stories about my husband, that I saw that my inner experience shifted, that I got calm, I got quiet, I felt peaceful, and I moved through that moment of a big surge of grief.
Yeah.
Now, if I wrote a book on grief, and in the book, one of the chapters was, when you're having a grief experience, write your thank you notes. You know, if I gave that out as a technique,
Yeah.
people would think I was totally friggin' crazy, right? You know, they would write me off as some silly, cheap pop psychologist, because that would not be the thing for most other people to do in that moment. But that's what came from within my inner wisdom. Right now, if you do this, it'll help. And I was like, whoa. And I really saw from that point that I was guided through the entire experience of, you know, settling an estate, parenting a child who was grief-stricken, trying to figure out what it meant to be a woman who was no longer a couple in the world, all the things that come with a transformative loss. I really saw that I was completely guided through the simplest and the large things.
Yeah. That's gorgeous. And it strikes me as that, you know, for some people that might feel like quite a wild thing to do, is just to kind of tune into what feels right for them that might not look right for the rest of the world as well. Because I think it's almost like there's this sense of permission. Like, we expect grief to look a certain way, but actually that wasn't the experience that you were having. You were seeing those moments of like gratitude and peace. And it was almost like just allowing yourself those. And I think it's so tempting because we're kind of taught what grief should look like, aren't we? And it felt like you're moving more from what was right for you and what felt, you know, that deeper knowing for you, rather than, you know, the prescription of what happens in grief, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You know, it's so interesting because Bill also lost his wife the year after I lost my husband. And his experience was very different, and his movement through the process was really different. But it didn't follow any static process. It was very organic, and it came from within. It came from a guided place within. And I really saw that as if I was quiet, if I just allowed myself to drop into that quiet space and didn't try to fight it, that the guidance was just there, and I could see it with real clarity. since then, now a lot of writers about grief will talk about how it's common for people after a grief experience of any kind to drop into a place of numbness. I'm not sure anymore that they're really talking about numbness. I think they're really talking about a quiet, a silence that can come when people somehow see my intellect cannot get me through this.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. And of course, then it looks like it's a problem because it's framed as numbness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Psychic numbness that has to be somehow resolved. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were you a counselor at this point?
I was.
So how did that kind of sit with your kind of training of counseling with grief?
You know, I had not done a tremendous amount of grief work. I avoided it. I didn't like it. And if someone was put in a slot and my calendar, because I was in a big office of therapists, and I would find out that they had that their presenting issue was grief. You know, that's what we called it, the presenting issue. They had been assigned to me because I was kind of the next up on the roster to get an assignment, or because they had asked for me. I would ask that they be transferred to a different therapist because I did not want to work with grief. And it was really quite funny that I had been asked by a minister to run this grief group at his parish, like I said earlier, 3 weeks before my husband died, because I'd never done anything with grief. And I said, no, Bob, I don't deal with grief. My practice was run by a woman whose family owned a whole set of funeral homes. And she was a grief counselor, and she was amazing. I said, you need to get Priscilla to do that. He said, no, I don't want Priscilla this time. She's busy. And he said, and I know you, and I think you have something to offer these people that will be very, very, very deep and very profound. And he had a number of people in his parish who had been widowed. Wasn't that funny? The majority of them were widows. And so I started with the group, and then bang, 3 or 4 weeks into it, I'm widowed.
Wow.
And it became a very, very powerful experience.
Yeah.
And one of these, so the two gifts were, one was beauty. Beauty doesn't stop. Second was silence. In the silence, there's always guidance. And the third was, you referenced this, Nicole, earlier, the softening effect of gratitude. And so I remember one time I was out back behind our house. I lived deep in the woods, and our house was heated by a wood stove, so I had to keep the wood coming into the house. And the wood pile was away from the house because in West Virginia, copperhead snakes are always an ever-present reality. And so you always leave your wood a good ways away from the house. I had to move the wood from the wood pile over to the deck of the house and then put it in the wood box in order to keep the fire going in the house. And I was pissed because the snow was about 24 inches deep, and I had to drag this friggin' wood all the way over from the wood place to the wood box. And I was mad, and I was hollering, and I was screaming at Jim, how dare you leave me with this job? This is your job. It is not my job. And I was probably foaming and frothing at the mouth, in addition to just sobbing. This was probably about 8 or 9 weeks after he died. And all of a sudden, I just stopped, and I got aware. I noticed how quiet it was. And we were so far in the woods, there was no sound of visible traffic or anything, just quiet. And I dropped into that quiet, and I noticed the bird feeders that my husband had always loved to keep. He loved watching birds feed. And I watched the birds for a while feeding. And I had this thought come into my head. This was not a thought that I willed. It just came. It's like, thank you, Jim, for showing me the beauty of nature. Thank you for reminding me to be present to nature always.
Wow.
And I watched my experience shift from anger and upset to grief and to gratitude and love. I watched it shift.
Yeah.
And I was really curious about that. How did that happen?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
And it wasn't like you had kind of purposefully forced that to happen either. It just kind of occurred. It feels.
Yeah, exactly. And I wasn't keeping a gratitude journal. I didn't have any gratitude practice. It was a spontaneous insight and that I could not really explain until I had the language of the principles that showed me that as thought was moving through my head and I was noticing it, different experiences were occurring, but also that there is something in the silence behind life that is very beautiful, that is always guiding us in the direction of a beautiful feeling, a deeper, beautiful feeling.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
And that was a gift. I would see that over and over, that when I actually began to move myself more deliberately in that direction, when I would get caught in a really powerful feeling of grief, I would find myself remembering things I could be grateful for, and I would notice that every single time it really softened the experience and took me back in the direction of love.
Yeah, because as much as there's nothing to do, we can still kind of choose which direction to look, it feels to me. Because for a long time I misheard that. I was like, there's nothing to do, I just have to wait here and and yeah, and then I was like, oh no, actually we can still do stuff. So it feels like there's that kind of, it offers a freedom almost, that we don't need to do anything, but we can still choose. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, and I think for me, the doing has a lot to do with noticing, which is consciousness behind the scenes. Is, there are many places where Sid Banks writes things like mental health is only one thought away if you can just find that thought, if you can just see that thought. Well, finding, to me, hinges on awareness. You can't find something if you're not noticing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times when we're going fast, thoughts are actually crossing the screen of our minds that we don't see.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I noticed, is that when I could go back to that place of quiet, Dick and Bettinger will sometimes talk about falling back into the place of quiet. But when I could go into that silence, that's how I saw it, is just going into the silence, I would start to notice beautiful thoughts that would take me in the direction of gratitude.
Yeah, it feels to me like that noticing is kind of that deeper listening that we often talk about. Yeah.
And in a really simple kind of way, practical kind of way, it just felt a whole heck of a lot nicer to be in that feeling of gratitude than it was to be in the feeling of anguish. That's one of the things I noticed. That anguish, that rage, that doesn't feel real good. It's depleting, it's exhausting. And when I would instead move to that beautiful place of gratitude, that felt like a meditation. That felt enervating, that felt animating, that felt like it would just fill me up and I would be spacious. And I remember after that very first experience of seeing that, thinking to myself, this honors my husband's memory and legacy far, far more than my anger and my distress. And that was really helpful to me, because I wanted more than anything to honor the legacy that he'd left me. And the final thing that I would share as a gift of grief is the power of transformation. When somewhere along the way, this was probably months into the process of kind of redoing my life, because I had to rebuild. I went to a workshop that Frederick Hudson, who's one of the leading experts worldwide then in adult education. And I was in this thing and I didn't know what I expected to hear, but all of a sudden he said, this is what I remember him saying, no one experiences catastrophic loss unless it's time for them to give up who they are in order to become who they're meant to be.
Mm.
No one experiences catastrophic loss unless it's time for them to give up who they are in order to become who they were meant to be. Well, that just penetrated something for me.
Mm.
And I think I remember thinking, you know, maybe at some level I can't appreciate there's a purpose in this.
Mm.
And you know, Sydney Banks talked a lot about staying in the moment of the now, and he tried to say so often, I'm not talking about a place in time. I'm talking about a state of knowing that life is in perfect motion.
Mm.
He doesn't say life is perfect. And really, in truth, if Sid Banks had stood in front of me in that moment and said, your life is perfect, I would have decked the guy.
Yeah.
But a perfect motion, that fits my experience, that hearing those words set in, it liberated me in a way. It was like, okay, that's really true. A lot of the structure around which I've built my identity is gone. And this is a beautiful opportunity to create something completely new.
Mm.
I think that's what's happening now with the virus. I think that's what's happening now with the whole, all the Black Lives Matter protests here in the United States and worldwide, that there's been kind of a catastrophic interruption in our story and our understanding of who we are.
Yeah.
And we're being gifted with an incredible opportunity to ride the life-death life cycle, to say, you know what, there are some aspects of ourselves that we just have to give death to.
Mm.
We just have to make way and let go of, and stand in that space that's somewhat scary space for a lot of people, what's called the liminal space. The space of not knowing, the space when you're letting go of what was, but you really don't know what's coming. And embrace that place, because that's the place of transformation.
Yeah, it certainly feels to me that stuff is being illuminated that we would not have seen before had we not kind of had this space to listen and see something different, and that kind of offers us this world of possibility for change, and that feels like what you're kind of saying in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's so simple. Like I remember sitting in my easy chair after Jim died, watching the television and kind of looking at my hand and noticing that I held the remote control in it. And I don't know if any of you ever have this experience, but in our house, even today in my house with Bill, the person who controls the remote control happens to wear the male gender. Bill has gotten much better at that. He's taken to always making sure the remote control is on the arm of his chair, that where I can reach it too. But I remember this moment of thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not fighting Jim for the remote control. I can watch whatever I damn well please, and it doesn't have to be sports. And I was someone who tended to, just kind of go along. You know, if that's what you want to watch, that's okay. But I know that sounds really simple and silly, but it was a beautiful moment of, oh, I'm redefining myself. What do I like?
Yeah.
What do I stand for? What do I mean? I found that after my dad died too. He died about 11 years ago. He was a very powerful figure in my life in a very positive way. And yet there was a really beautiful kind of feeling of, I'm freer at a new level from his influence. I'm really freer to define myself fully and completely. And what does that mean to me?
Mm.
When I found the principles and had to let go of a lot of the understandings I'd been taught in psychology, I experienced the same thing. This is really transformative.
Yeah.
This is really beautiful. I get to really define not what I've been taught in all these textbooks, or not even what I've been taught by Sid Banks,
Yeah.
but by what is real and true to me.
I love that, because again, I think you've referenced it a few times, like it gave you a language for what you'd experienced,
Yeah.
but it's still just a form of explaining how it works, and it's still kind of a language that we all use in different ways. And when I'm talking with clients, we all have our different ways of explaining what wisdom is, and there's different words that we'll use. Some people will call it love or divinity, or there's lots of different languages that we use, and we're all kind of pointing in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a language for what's already kind of there.
Yeah. And Sid himself said very clearly that the principles were a metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were a metaphor. They were words he found that were the best he could find to describe what he saw, to provide the logic of what he saw. But that what he really saw was how love worked.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was funny because the other day when I was at 3P UK doing my talk, in one of the breakout sessions, there was a lady called Harriet Hancock who was sharing about grief as well. And she was talking about how grief is love in disguise, which felt really, again, another nice way of looking at it. It's I don't know what you make of that, but it just felt like, yeah, there was something in that.
Well, I don't know that I'd ever use those words, but I did see for myself that grief took me straight into the heart of life, that the only thing that mattered in life was love.
Mm.
I was really struck when my husband was a really first husband, much like my current husband, was a really sweet, beautiful, loving, deep man. And he had lots of people at his memorial services, and I was really struck that people weren't remembering his degrees or things he'd accomplished in his life, and he had accomplished a lot. They were speaking from their hearts about how much he had loved.
Mm. That's gorgeous.
And he himself had written about 6 months before he died, when his father died, that he was thinking deeply about death, and that he realized that the only thing people leave behind them is their love. And that's enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really nice pointer towards who we are, really. It feels, that's kind of what, sums up what, for me, Sydney Banks is always talking about,
Yeah.
But also I feel like Sid always was kind of pointing towards our humanness as well, because like he talked about the beauty of being ordinary and how thought was a gift, and so yeah, I kind of see in what you're saying as well, that it's like we're here to kind of embrace being human as well. It's not about kind of transcending to this kind of spiritual place where it feels like an embracing of the richness of the experience, whether that be the kind of messiness of it or the beauty of it. That's how it feels to me anyway.
Well, yeah, it's like there's a place in a book called I think it's Island of Knowledge, where Sid says one of the major problems that all of us have is that we get hooked on our image of self-importance.
Mm.
And he said, be clear that you are no more important than a grain of sand in the Sahara Desert.
Mm.
Now, that's not very important. And yet it kind of puts things in perspective to me. Someone once said we're alive as long as we're remembered. Well, there will come a place 100 years from now where no one will remember me. Anyone who knew me, who physically knew my person, will not remember me. I won't be carried forward in any conscious way. That's humbling. And yet we never know in how many ways that are nameless that we're remembered. We're remembered because of the love we gave,
Yeah.
the kind thing that we did that changed a life, or changed a soul, or kept someone else alive, or nurtured a child, or whatever. We just don't know.
Mm.
But the love we give is very enduring. It's very lasting, and I just happen to have a sense that it's woven into the entire fabric of the universe.
Yeah.
And so we're infinitely important in our unimportance.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. I like that. Beautiful.
And I think that's what you're pointing to, Nicole, is that in our humanness, the little human things that we do in our ordinariness, they really do matter.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's how it feels to me. I don't know if it's a good time to ask if anybody has any questions right now. So does anybody want to come on? Yeah, Jackie's raising her hand. Anybody else want to raise their hand as well? I'll just unmute you, Jackie. And you can always drop stuff in the chat box as well. There we go, Jackie.
Yes, hi.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi. Yeah, my experience with grief is my grandma's been gone for 20 years, well, 21 years, and I still miss her every day, of course. But the first time that I actually helped plan a funeral was when my stepdad died, and he died in 2005. And there was me and my twin sister and my husband and her husband and my mom. And, none of us really knew, because nothing was pre-planned. But when it came to, the gal was asking about what my mom wanted on my stepdad's marker, and she was telling her. And then when she asked my mom what if she wanted to go ahead and plan hers and have her marker planned, and it was so sad and so tense that I told Mom, I go, you better go ahead and plan yours, because you don't know what me and Janet's going to put on it. And I just started laughing. I couldn't stop laughing. I had to literally leave the room. I couldn't stop laughing. And I went back in there, and then I, of course, started laughing again. I finally settled down, but the lady who was helping us, I was embarrassed, and I felt like I was disrespecting, my stepdad. But the lady said that we'd be surprised at how often that happens. It kind of breaks the ice and kind of lightens things up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, Jackie.
Yeah, but I mean, I couldn't not stop laughing. And then my mom passed away 3 years ago. At age 82, she was diagnosed with ALS of all things. And thank the Lord that he took her within 4 months, because she was just getting so bad. But my twin sister and I, dealing with my mom's funeral and death was not good. My sister took care of her last, before we had to put her into an assisted living and then she was only in there for just a couple months. But my sister, she took care of everything. She kind of tried to keep me out of making decisions, and if they met with a social worker, I never met any of them. But then when my mom passed, and even after she passed, if my sister likes to remind me that she loved her more, because she took flowers to the cemetery all the time, and I don't take them as often as she does, but that doesn't mean that I cared any less for her.
Right.
And stuff. So yeah, grief, and for each person is their own process. And I have some medical issues now that I'm going through, possible diagnosis with breast cancer, there's times when I just lay in bed and wish my mom was still here and wish my grandma was still here to help me. But I just ask him to please watch over me and, help me get through it.
Yeah.
So
I'm really grateful for your sharing, and a couple of things came to mind as I was listening. I loved what you said about laughing and the value of laughter. I remember that when my dad died, he struggled with Parkinson's disease for 16 years, and his body was ravaged. It just was a really hard challenge that he walked through. And when we went into the funeral home, the funeral director said, I looked at your dad's body. I washed it. I took care of it. And I know he suffered a lot. And I'm sure that you suffered a lot with him. But I'm going to ask you all to just be quiet for a minute. He pointed us toward the silence. Just be quiet. And think of just one word, not 2 words, not 3 words, not 5 words. Just one word that describes something beautiful. You use the word beautiful that you experienced with your dad. So was my mom and the 5 of us, my 4 brothers and sisters and I. And we were all, I think we were all really focused on the negative experience of watching him deteriorate. In the last number of months of his life were really hard. And we were all involved in the caretaking. And each one of us shared a word. And it was exactly what you experienced. We all started laughing and remembering him as he had been, in our lives. And I was so grateful for that. I often think that funeral director gave us back the gift of my father in his wholeness, not just the part of him that had endured an incredible illness. So, yeah, I thank you for that sharing. There was something else that came to mind as I was listening. Oh, one thought that I had was, I don't know how many of you have been with people who have been dying, but they all die differently. And my father saw a party and kept telling everyone to get ready for a big party, and told my mother, go buy a dress with blue flowers on it for my party, and go get me a top hat because I want to wear a top hat at my party. My father-in-law talked about being at the bottom of a giant set of steps and trying to figure out how to get up the steps to his loved ones. I see them. How do I get there? And his son said, Dad, maybe you should just ask someone to come down and help you. And he sort of, did this to his head and said, oh, of course. And he died that way. And then others Bill's wife died in a different way. I've often been struck that even to our last breath, the power of thought is there to support us as we're making our transition.
Yeah. I know when my grandma died, a few days before, she started talking to her parents or brothers and sisters who had passed, like they were here. And I told my grandma in tears, I said, maybe they're telling you it's okay for you to go and be with them. Yeah. Maybe it's time. Because she had Alzheimer's, and she was blind in one eye and in a nursing home. And so it was time. And it's like we needed to give her permission, and that Grandpa was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And it was okay for her to go and be with her parents and her brothers and sisters now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't long after that she passed. I can remember that like it was yesterday.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
So,
Yeah.
But thank you for being on here. And this is a good topic to help out.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie. That was a gorgeous share. Thank you. We also have Natalie. I'm going to unmute you, Natalie, so that you can come on. There we go.
Hello. I turn my video
Hi,
on.
Natalie.
Hi. Hello. How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you for your lovely talk. I tried to persuade my sister and my dad to join this evening, but they're too upset. So, sorry. So my mum passed away a month ago. Very sudden. And they aren't aware of the 3 principles, and I try not to be an evangelist because you lose people, don't you, when you start just blurting out them. But I was talking to him today, and he said he's not sad for himself, but when he thinks of us. And I would really like if I could try and find a way to help him. I should turn my video off. So
No.
it would be nice to see you, and then I've just come on here and blurted like a maniac. So I'll start again. So it would really help me. So you expect to lose a parent. I mean, I only buried my gran 3 years ago, so I didn't expect to lose my mum quite so soon. They're young. My mum and dad are only 71. So I wasn't ready for it, but I can reconcile that with life and processes, and and I know I was loved. I feel I'm good with that. But my dad, like you, he's lost someone he didn't expect to lose, and I just I don't know how to help him other than keep popping around and demanding cups of tea in a very British fashion. Yes, all the tea. Yeah. And I just wondered, you obviously. I've met you in London before, and you have such a beautiful way of looking at things. I wondered if you had any words of wisdom to help somebody else through grief, not yourself, if you see what I mean. Sorry for the rambling.
I think that's a beautiful question, because we can see people who are hurting and we really want to help them. And I think one of my experiences was recognizing that there wasn't anyone who could help me. That it's a process that ultimately in the end we all have to go through alone. But I can tell you one thing that was so incredibly beautiful, and probably was the single most important thing that got me through, was that a friend of mine would call me every week on Saturday. And this continued for over a year. Every week on Saturday, I knew the phone would ring, I'd pick it up, and it was my friend Peggy. And she would say one thing, what do you need today? And some days I didn't need anything. Sometimes I just needed to have a cup of tea with her and and talk about funny things, or talk about my daughter, or talk about the weather. And other times, one of the things I just most needed at a certain point was to talk about Jim over and over and over again. And I thought that was so exquisitely beautiful, that she just stayed present through the whole thing. And just because I have a lot of awareness of what's in the literature on grief too, is that most people, by and large, again, this is in the form, most people by and large, in the first 3 months after a bereavement, particularly if it's been very close, they don't even know how to find words for it. But just the presence, that you're there with them having the cup of tea, or communicating that you care, communicating that they're not broken because they're going through this experience and having ups and downs with it, is hugely important. And then somewhere along the line, people sometimes start to shift into a different space where they want to talk, or they want to share, or sometimes they don't. They continue the process in a really individual way, and all of that is okay.
Mm.
It's the presence that you bring, the standing with, the presence. I'm with you in this. If there's anything you need, I'm here. That listening means more than anything. And it calls forth. I was reading something that George Pransky wrote the other day in the Relationship Handbook that just hit me so hard. He talked about how when we're in compassion, and compassion is not empathy. Compassion is not feeling the feelings of another person. Compassion is standing with the feelings of another person in understanding, standing with in understanding. That when we're in that space, it calls forth healing from the other person. That's enough. That's enough.
Thank you. That's thank you. That's lovely.
And thank you for feeling comfortable enough to share your tears. I think those are a gift. And to not have to excuse them away or apologize them away, but just be with them. That's a gift. That's human.
That's really lovely of you. Thank you.
That's very much what I felt too, Natalie. It's just very human. And also I think what occurs to me is just remembering that everybody has their own wisdom is sometimes another kind of reminder for us that there's nothing to do, and just as Linda said, that presence is what matters most. So you're already kind of, again, your wisdom's already guiding you in having those cups of tea. So yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
There's a lot of love in the group as well. You might want to read the chat.
Thanks.
Does anybody else want to come on and share a question or anything else like that? I was just going to ask you, Linda, myself actually, because sometimes people can get very caught in grief, and I just wondered if you would speak to that, because again, it feels like Sid was always talking about how we don't need to be frightened of our experience, and I think that's something I've very much begun to see. But there are people who perhaps don't see that when they're grieving. So I don't know whether that's something you can speak to.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the research is really quite clear that the vast majority of people, except in a few specific circumstances, 80-some%, return to a baseline of level of functioning after a bereavement within 6 months. And then another very large chunk return to some sort of baseline level of functioning within a year. The difficulty with the research is that the baseline level of functioning may or may not be very high. You know, but at least people return to some sort of feeling that they're normal, even though their normal might have not been great. But then there's a very small subset of people who go on to have what the research calls complicated grief. And that what that means is that they move into a depressed state. And recovery from a sudden loss, a catastrophic sudden loss, it does take longer. Let me just say that. That's one of the big deviations in the research. But when people really move into a space where they can't stop crying, it's been more than 6 months and they can't stop crying, where they maybe can't sleep and it's become very chronic and very persistent, they can't concentrate to the point that it's interfering with their work or their ability to care for children, or you know, all the things that you could go on and Google, you know, what does a clinical depression look like? In those cases, interestingly, the most helpful thing is to have someone to talk to have someone who's just willing to listen.
Yeah.
And that's often when people will consult a counselor or go to a grief group or talk to a pastor, you know, find a friend who's willing to listen. I think the challenge to all of us, especially those of us who are helpers, is most helpers like I did, have a really hard time sitting present to grief.
I think one of the things that again occurs to me is just that knowing that despite all of that, we're not broken, and that we're not trying to fix our experience of grief. It's like that's just a normal human thing to feel in that circumstances. And so I think that helps, because it's the second we start to think we're broken and that process is a problem, is where it becomes a problem. You know, kind of it's almost like that kind of acceptance of that as a process and allowing of that experience, that feels for me like something that's very healing. Kind of allowing our thoughts to be there, and it helps to know, I guess, the principles, you know, that of how that works and how that impacts our feelings. But it's also more useful to know that that's just a wisdom that's inbuilt, that's not broken.
Yeah, and that's the guidance behind life that we were pointing to earlier, that every one of us is given everything we need to move through that experience, coming through the silence of our minds. And what that guidance is could be very different from person to person, but it's always there.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. I don't know if anybody else has any more. Oh, Tony, are you trying to, you're waving. I'm just gonna oh yeah, are you unmuted? Yeah, hi.
Hi, Tony.
Hey, Linda. When you started that you talked today, you'd mentioned how many people today, in the circumstances that we've been in the last few months, are experiencing grief in various forms. And, you know, most of the time for me and many people that I hear, when you speak of grief, they all think about somebody died, you know, and the tremendous loss of some sort. But grief takes on all kinds of forms. And I was surprised a few weeks ago. I had to stop and recognize what was it that I was feeling. And I was feeling grief about, and it surprised me, but I was feeling it about letting go of what was a way that I've been working in the world, and what I knew and that sort of stuff. And that it was time for it to close, and that I was going to move on and create something new. And I was floored whenever I realized I was grieving it, and I just needed to give myself permission to let it happen, you know. And wow, it just dissolved after that. But that's what you were pointing to about, you know, just with all of this stuff, you know, people referenced terms like, oh, this is so weird, off the wall. There's nothing about this virus thing that's taken over the whole world that we have reference to. Okay. And so they just didn't know what to do with it, you know? And so they literally, I've talked with many people who have been sheltered at home for months, and they just are waiting for what they knew, what was, to come back. Like, it'll be back, it'll all be good tomorrow, you know? Like it's a point that we'll arrive at, you know. That's just, there's some form of grief going on that goes on, you know. When you recognize it, then it can change or pass or dissolve into whatever it is that it's going to turn into. But we get stuck in thinking it, we're calling it one thing, and we just don't want to allow it to happen. Kind of like you Nicole, when you said, you're like, I'm broken, I don't want to be broken, so I don't want to go there. You know, it's like we're afraid of it. You know, Sid constantly said, we just quit being afraid of your experience, you know. But to even just allow it to show up, so we can name it what it is, you know, feel it for what it is. The name doesn't matter, but it's allowing that feeling, because we all have some meaning we've attached to the word grief or the word joy or whatever, and that's what we're feeling is their meaning up there, you know. And that's why it shows up different for everybody, because of the meaning we've attached to it.
Yeah, I love that. I love the word that you used, Tony, dissolved. I think it's a beautiful word. It just has such a nice feeling to it. And I think it's worth remembering that, you know, those of us in the Three Principles world often point back to Sid, that after Sid's wife, Barbara, died, his first wife, he had deep grief. And he went to Hawaii. A friend gave him allowed him to stay in his condo in Hawaii, and he went to Hawaii to get a change of scenery. And he spent months just in the silence, in the stillness, in the space of allowing all of that to happen and come through him, not feeling like he needed to resist it or be afraid of it, but just to allow it to come until it dissolved into a space of energy where he felt ready to go back to Salt Spring and resume his work. What a beautiful thing to be able to gift yourself that time to just be in something and then let it dissolve.
Yeah, I didn't know that, Linda. One of my favorite quotes, and I repeat it all the time, is by Jeff Foster, and he says, feelings come up to be held, not healed. And I think there's something beautiful in that, because it's like, and when I say held, I don't mean held on too tightly, I kind of mean accepted. And that's what it feels like, because as Tony said, it's kind of, it's just an experience. And there's a richness in all of the experiences in life, it feels to me. I don't know what you think to that, Tony, as well.
Nicole, the thing that stands out to me in all of this is, if we came to experience life in form, feeling it is the whole reason we came here. So if we spend all our energy trying to resist feeling it, how silly is that?
Yeah.
Wait, I bought the ticket, but I don't want to go in.
I love that. Yeah.
So that we scare ourselves so easily for whatever reason. It doesn't matter the why it happens, but we just do. And hey, sometimes we pay to scare ourselves. You go to an amusement park and you go, oh, and other times we go, oh no, I'm scaring myself.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's gorgeous.
I feel moved to say one thing, because I know that there are people on the call who are experiencing bereavement, loss, and grief. Is that after my husband died, I was working in a private practice, and the psychiatrist I worked with came up to me in the hallway one day, and he said, Linda, I can tell you're really having a hard time. Are you okay? And I said, Sam, I am, except that I can't sleep. And it's really hard to keep going when you can't sleep. And he said, I'd like to give you something for that. And he actually gave me some Xanax and a prescription for Xanax. And I know a lot of people in the Three Principles world, when they hear medication, they kind of go, But Bill and I have a really different take on it. And I didn't use that very much, and I didn't use it for long, but for about 3 months, maybe as many as 4 or 5, periodically every couple of nights, I would take a Xanax so that I could sleep. And I have often said that I can deal with anything, I don't care what it is, as long as I can sleep. And I was so grateful to Sam that he saw what I was going through, and that he was willing to reach out and say, this can help. This can help. But, granted that the benzodiazepines have addictive potential, and he was very careful of that. He only gave me one prescription, all that stuff. But it was important. And recently, a friend of Sid Banks's sent me a letter. I actually published it on my website. It's in a blog called Pearls of Wisdom. And when her daughter was, her child was really ill and on medicine, she talked to Sid about the medicine, and Sid said to her, dearie, the pills are God too. The pills are God too. So if you have been grieving or gone through a grief, or know someone who is, and they're using antidepressant medications because they've gotten a little snared or stuck, or they're using something to sleep or whatever, the pills are God too. The important thing is to keep pointing people back to wisdom, because as Sid also said to this woman, when you don't need them anymore, you will know. And there was a point when that occurred to me, I don't need this anymore, I'm okay.
Yeah, it's really, actually, that's really interesting, because I was just thinking there was a question that was sent through before we started, that was all about making decisions, and you've kind of just pointed to that a little bit. So I thought it would be a good point to ask that question. It's not really related to grief, actually. It was more about decisions. She says, throughout my life, I have made decisions that I can see came because I thought they were right rather than feeling they were right. So I have this sense of distrust in my decision making and a feeling like I have failed myself. My life has been one with misaligned studies, ill health, divorce, relationships from the head, not the heart. How do I cultivate a different belief of life with possibilities, with alignment and a deep feeling of resonance?
Anyone want to take a stab at that? That's a beautiful, deep question. Yeah, Tony, go ahead.
You know, the thing that stands out for me is a belief is nothing but a thought. So why would I want to go to a thought that I'm getting hung up in and create another one? It's like I just exchanged one belief for another one. Because I swam for decades in my head. I was just caught up, and it was a miserable existence. And all I would do was chase another belief to take one out, put another one back in, and it was just as prickly as the one before, you know. And seeing that there's the heart, that it can be described anyway, but wisdom is just coming from a different place, and you can't do it for anybody. You have to find it for yourself. It's like riding a bicycle. Ain't nobody can teach you how to ride a bicycle till your butt's on the seat. You ain't riding. You didn't find balance in you, you know. And you discover it, and you go, oh, I might have been really, really little, and I forgot for so long. I don't remember what it's like, and then I remember, and now I got it, you know. And I'll forget, and I'll get it again. That's all I think that ever happens to any of us, is that we forget how life is, how simple it is from the heart, and then we remember again. That's that aha, and then we forget, and then we remember again. You know, and the whole listing thing is having people who are willing to hold that space with us, however we are, in whatever space we're in, without getting caught up in it. And then we remember the feeling, how nice it feels to be with them. And then that resonates in us, and we can find our space again.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. And what occurred to me was when I was having a difficult time making decisions about my own relationship, because I got divorced, and I remember someone said to me, it was Jenny Anderson, and she said, there's no decision to be made, but a decision will be made. And it just reminded me that, you know, we think that we're the ones who have to make the decisions, you know, intellectually, and for me it was very much a reminder that, you know, it's all happening with a wisdom to it anyway. So that was another point I just wanted to add to that, but I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Linda.
I think it's just a great conversation, and I personally think that it's one that we don't have deeply enough in the Three Principles world, is how do we tell the difference between wisdom and intellectual thought? Because the indigenous people, the ancients, they understood following intuition. They had ways of bringing it forward into their cultures. They honored it. They revered it. They sought it. And they ended up creating a lot of ritual around it. But they knew it was there, and there was we don't have that. We don't have a deep, deep understanding and knowing, and a way of helping people to know when they're hearing wisdom. And, you know, I think personally for me, one of the most helpful things that Sydney Banks said about wisdom is in Quest of the Pearl, where he says, very simply, wisdom comes not like the roar of a lion. It comes with the bleat of a lamb. Wisdom is never disturbing. That's crucial. Wisdom is never disturbing. But what happens is that whenever the ego hears wisdom, it gets jarred.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you hear something, go toward this, take this step. Oh, I can't do that. Nobody else will like it. It doesn't fit my life plan. What if somebody objects? That'll put me outside the mainstream. You know, we have all these thoughts that come, and then we get stuck.
Yeah.
And we can't tell the difference between the wisdom in the marching band that's playing in our head. But that's what I found really helpful, was to look back at the original sort of knowing, that still small voice that comes up, that still small voice that is never disturbing. But if my ego is really having a play date with what's going on in my head, then I know, oh, I heard something. What was it that I heard? What's underneath all the noise?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. I don't know if there's anybody else got a question, or if that's a good place to end, because it's a nice reminder. But if anybody else has another question, feel free to wave at me. I'll see if I can scan through quickly and just see. Oh, hang on, Jackie's I'm just going to unmute you, Jackie, quickly.
Hi again.
Hi, Jackie.
I just have one last question. A couple of my friends have either lost their kids way too soon. My one friend lost a granddaughter when she was 3, and another friend lost her daughter to a brutal murder. And when they post pictures of them on Facebook, you know, for their birthdays, or, you know, I still don't know what to say, or if I should say anything. I don't want them to think that I've forgotten them. So how do I deal with people who have lost their kids far too early?
That's a beautiful, beautiful question. And it was child death that I think I struggled with for the longest time. And, you know, really I post a picture of my late husband every Christmas Eve. And I post the obituary that I wrote for him. And it's just my way of keeping him alive, of remembering him. And I love it when people post simple little things like, I love this, or just a heart, or I remember too, or what a beautiful memory. I think all people are looking for is, because they know at deep heart that there's nothing anyone can say to take them out of any pain that they have left. They just want to know that they're not alone in it. And that can be done with the simplest little emoji.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, because I've never known, I've always wanted to say something, and then when I would start writing something, I go, no, that doesn't sound right, you know? So, yeah, but just even a little heart or a hug type thing or something, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a writer, and one of the most helpful things that I have learned as a writer actually came from a class that I'm taking right now, and what we've been taught is write like you talk. Write like you talk. Keep it simple, straightforward, in your own voice. And if your own voice is an emoji giver, give an emoji.
Okay.
If your own voice likes to write poetry, write poetry. You know, it's what comes up in your voice in response and it's the acknowledgement that makes the difference.
Yeah.
And so I want to say this, Jackie, because I think sometimes this gets overlooked. That you care enough to even ask that question is so beautiful. It comes from
Thank you, yeah. Yeah, because dealing with the loss of young kids way too soon has always been the hard spot for me. All right, well, thank you for answering that question for me and helping with that.
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, well, I don't know if anybody else has a last question, or whether there's anything else you want to share, Linda.
Just one thing that came to mind real quickly in response to Jackie's comment about children is I remember having a student who lost 2 children to a pernicious form of anemia, leukemia, when they were very little. I mean, they literally were beautiful, bright, active little boys one day, and within 6 months they were diagnosed with a genetic form of leukemia, and both died.
Gosh.
And she said to me, I was your teacher, and she came up to me and told me the story one day, and she said, you know, one of the hardest things for me to hear was people who came at me with spiritual platitudes. Oh, God never gives you more than you can handle. And she said it was just the people who came with a hug, or stood silently by, or cried, or said, I don't know what to say. And she said something that was really powerful to me. She said, I was not a woman who could handle, I was not a mother, I was not a woman who could handle the loss of her 2 children, her 2 beautiful little boys, in less than a year. But along the way, I became a woman who handled the loss of her 2 beautiful children in less than a year. I think we keep that in mind, like Nicole pointed out earlier, that people have everything they need inside of them. And sometimes it's just our compassion and standing with that helps to call forward their own wisdom.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I'm a big believer in that. Actually, through my self-rediscovery school, I have a foundations program, which is basically that exact same sort of space. It's kind of just like that safe space of kind of just holding whatever comes up and allowing people to really see the wisdom behind life, because that feels, for me, that feels the most important thing that we can see, which is what you pointed to right at the beginning. So that's gorgeous. Yeah, no, I love that. And thank you for that. And thank you so much for your beautiful sharing. It's got so many gems of wisdom in that, and yeah, it feels like it's been a really beautiful conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for all those of you who I've been watching your faces, or just really enjoyed your listening and your presence. So thank you for that.
Thank you. If you need to leave, feel free. I'm just going to announce the next speakers and what's coming up. So you're welcome to stay, or you're welcome to head out if you've got to go. But thank you so much. And again, if there's anything that you're kind of working on at the moment, I know you mentioned your blog, then kind of sharing all of those links. If you want to send them over to me, I can pop them in there, because there's a replay of this as well. So I usually pop any links to things that people are working on in there for people to find out more. So
thank you. And actually, I just posted a blog today called I was so grateful for this opportunity to do this. It's actually called Brilliance in the Darkness, a Gift of Grief, and it's
perfect.
It gives you a flavor for my blog. So if you want to check that out, that would be great. But thank you all. I'm going to hop off because I have to go to the next thing, but lots of love.
Thank you so much. And I am going to read that, Linda. Thank you. Thanks so much. So,
bye-bye.
Yeah, so next Friday, the 19th of June, I'm just going to pop you on different views so I can see you all. So next Friday, the 19th of June, we have a very fun conversation coming up. We have the wonderful Karen DeMarco, who is here to talk about how we can have fun humaning, or in her words, how playing with ourselves, as she puts it, which she also describes herself as a transformational comedian. So, so that one's going to be a lot of fun. Karen's she's a right proper giggle. So she's here to share with us. And then after that, we have Anchor sharing on money without boundaries, and then Marnix Powell's sharing about manifesting miracles through inspired action. And we also have Mark Howard as well joining us very soon. So that's all very exciting. And yeah, just going back to the self-rediscovery school that I was just talking about. I also am running 2 different programs in July, which I'm super excited about. I've just finished the first round of the foundations program, and there were so many beautiful beautiful moments of discovering wisdom in that, and it was just really special. So I'm very excited to be running that again, and it's just a kind of 6-week deep dive with masterclasses about how to kind of connect to rediscover our wisdom. and yeah, speaker montages that help us understand it in different ways, using the different languages that Linda and I were talking about, and tuning into what your language is for the 3 principles as well, along with kind of rediscovery immersions and then live circles. So that it's very special. Really excited for that. And then I've been working on an 8-week Unravel program, which is more centered on kind of embracing our humanness and the creativity that we have, and playing and dancing in that kind of joy as well. So that's something else that I've been creating. Somebody sent me, one of the speakers who's part of that sent me some content over for that this week, and I ended up dancing around the living room with my baby bump, so that was good fun. But yeah, we've got lots coming up in the summit, so it's going to be a lot of fun over the next few weeks. So yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. And yeah, reading your comments is just really beautiful. So thank you for popping those in the comments box as well. And yeah, we'll leave it there with lots of love. So love to you all. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you soon.